this is Yanina Edinger with Ironclad Property Management, calling all owners of rental property in Connecticut. We prefer to use the term housing provider over the archaic landlord term because we owners are not royalty. We're not inherently aristocratic as the term would imply. Anyway, as of October 1st, 2023, a new law took effect and strengthened renters' rights and protections here in Connecticut. Let me give you a rundown on these new acts affecting housing and real estate and what you need to know. Everyone wants to have a tenant who can pay their rent, who will take care of the property, and who will be a responsible and respectful neighbor. We as housing providers do our best to screen tenants, gathering any lawful source of income info, doing a credit and background check, meaning do they have a history of not paying bills, which would affect their credit, checking to see if they have a history of getting evicted for not paying rent, and we check references, including the housing providers who rented to them in the past. This takes time. Time is money, and so an application fee is usually charged by many housing providers. This bill limits the rental application fees. There can be a charge for a tenant screening report of up to $50 plus an inflation adjustment. But housing providers may not charge any other fees, charges, or payments before the tenant moves in, meaning no move-in, move-out fees, with only a few exceptions. Security deposit, advance payment for the first month's rent, deposits for a key or other special equipment, and fees for a tenant screening report. And as we said, that screening report fee is capped. Sometimes tenants aren't able to pay exactly on the day rent is due. Life happens, right? Connecticut gives tenants a 9-day grace period in which they can turn in their rent without penalty and no late fees. So, if rent is due on the 1st, a tenant can turn in rent on the 2nd, the 7th, or even the 10th of the month without a late fee tacked on. This is a 4-day grace period for those who have week-to-week tenancies. But in our case, on the 11th under the Act, if a rental agreement contains a valid written agreement to pay late charges after the grace period, the charges cannot exceed the lesser of $5 per day, up to a $50 maximum, or 5% of the overdue rent, or 5% of the tenant's share of the rent in the case of rental agreements that are partially paid by a government or charitable entity. The Act also prohibits rental agreements from requiring tenants to agree to late charges that exceed these limits, and prohibits housing providers from assessing more than one late charge on an overdue rent payment. So, if you used to charge $20 per day to discourage late payments, you can't do that anymore. Or if you had a late fee imposed for Section 8 tenant who pays $50 out of pocket per month, you can only charge $2.50 per day starting on the 11th. So if they pay their rent that was due on the 1st, on the 28th, their late fee is $45. And you are set up to go through the anxiety of will they be able to pay the next month's rent all over again in a couple of days. Beginning January 1st, 2024, housing providers must give an opportunity to tenants to request and do a pre-occupancy walkthrough. We have always done pre-move-in inspections just before the tenant moves in, so this isn't a process change for us. We will again invite the tenant, if they choose, to walk through jointly with our team member as we note on video and in person the unit's existing conditions, defects, damages if any, using a Department of Housing checklist. We'll save this video, and when it's time for them to move out, we compare conditions. This act prohibits the housing provider from keeping any portion of the tenant's security deposit or seeking payment for a condition, defect, or damage noted in the pre-occupancy checklist. We at Ironclad would never charge a tenant for damage that was there when they moved in. We expect the dwelling to be returned to us in the same condition it was received. So let's talk about security deposits. Under the previous law, after tenancy was terminated or ended, housing providers had the greater of these two options to return the tenant's security deposit, or the balance, if any, plus accrued interest. It was either 30 days or 15 days after receiving written notification of the tenant's forwarding address. The Act reduces this 30-day deadline to 21 days. The Act also requires housing providers to pay interest annually on tenant security deposits. So just know this went into effect on October 1st. Let's talk about income and expense statements. By law, municipal assessors may require rental property owners to file annual income and operating expense statements to assist in their property valuations. The legislature passed a law that extends the deadline for taxpayers to request a filing extension from May 1st to June 1st. It also allows filings and extension requests that are postmarked on or by the due date to qualify as timely regardless if the municipality received it by that date or not. For late filings, the law sets time limits for municipalities to mail or deliver new bills incorporating the penalty and for bill payments to become due. The legislature also enacted a law that requires the Department of Housing Commissioner to develop standardized rental agreement forms that tenants and housing providers may use. This helps if you are new to rental real estate and need somewhere to start from. When selling your rental property, a new law requires the seller to provide a one-page disclosure on housing discrimination and federal and state fair housing laws at the closing for any residential property, not just for closings for properties with 2 or more units. If you are house hacking, which means living in a property where you either rent out a room or where you live in one unit and rent out the others in a multifamily property, you previously had the right not to accept someone based on their sexual orientation. The current act eliminates this exemption and in doing so subjects such an owner who violates the state's anti-housing discrimination law to a Class D misdemeanor, punishable by up to 30 days in prison, or a fine of $250, or both. These are some of the updated laws for Connecticut tenants and housing providers. To see a summary of all of the acts affecting housing and real estate, go to cga.ct/2023/RPT/2023-R-0153.pdf. There you will find the special report put out by the Office of Legislative Research. Hopefully you got a lot out of this video, and we're hoping that you can understand the Connecticut laws. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our Ironclad team, and we'll be sure to help you and connect you with the right people. Thanks.